Chris Coons is a Democratic senator from Delaware. He joins us now from Capitol Hill. Senator Coons, what did you make of the president's leaving a meeting, holding a press conference today?
Well, Kathy, President Trump's temper tantrum following his abbreviated meeting with Democratic leaders, which was meant to be a positive conversation about infrastructure and turned into just the latest display of the dysfunction of American politics, leaves me gravely concerned that President Trump doesn't recognize that congressional oversight is a central part of the American system of government. His predecessors, President Obama, President Bush, learned how to tolerate having unwelcome but assertive oversight by Congress. At the same time, they were able to legislate on the pressing challenges facing our country, whether infrastructure or health care or national security. I do think President Trump will eventually have to come back to the table, but for today, this is a disheartening development.
But Lord knows American infrastructure does need addressing. The president is being investigated on multiple fronts by Democrats, and there is frustration in the White House that this is stopping him from doing everything else and sucking up all of the oxygen. Isn't there also a risk here for Democrats that you become seen as the party that all you do is investigate the president?
Yes, that's why I'm working hard at introducing and moving bipartisan legislation in the Senate. Earlier today, I convened a roundtable conversation with executive CEOs from companies that support a carbon price, a carbon fee and dividend proposal, and I had a bipartisan group of Republicans and Democrats from the House and Senate who participated. That's just one small example of many. Kathy, I do think it's important that we keep legislating in a way that addresses the concerns of the average American, whether it's around jobs or health care or prescription drug costs. Tackling climate change is just one of many issues on the front burner, and Democrats have to demonstrate that we can do our job of appropriate oversight and legislate around the issues that matter to average Americans.
Right, so let's talk about that, because it's why we wanted you to come on the program before this bust-up between Democratic leaders and the president, to talk about this meeting with business leaders. Essentially, your plan seems to say, American people, you either pay now or you pay later. And you're talking about what effectively sounds like a carbon tax, an idea that has been around for a long time. How would it work, and how would you get it through the political system when your Republican colleagues have been skeptical for a very long time about the idea of taxing carbon?
Well, at the highest level, it would set a price per ton for carbon, and all the revenue collected would be returned to the American people as a dividend on a regular basis. It would start relatively low, but then escalate over years if we made no progress in reducing our emissions. What we heard today from these CEOs was that business is already pricing a carbon fee into their future business models because they expect that eventually this is going to be part of the regulatory and tax framework here in the United States, and that they think a long-term signal from the marketplace, a long-term government signal to the marketplace about pricing the externality of carbon pollution is the best way to allow the markets to work, to incentivize capital investment, research and development, deployment through both consumer action and industry action. There are carbon pricing or carbon tax schemes in other places in the world that have accelerated the deployment of carbon neutral or lower carbon forms of power generation and products and distribution systems. And the CEOs we met with today were really there to answer probing questions by Republicans in the Senate and the House who are warming to the idea.
It's worth just focusing on the companies that came to the Congress today, Senator Coons. I mean, among those 70 companies are names like BP, Royal Dutch Shell. So you've got big oil companies who are now buying into this idea of carbon taxes.
That's right. Those very large oil companies are considering their future and recognizing that as energy companies, companies that are fully diversified into cleaner and more renewable sources of energy, they have a strong future. If they were just limited to being oil and gas companies, their future is somewhat limited by the ways in which climate change is accelerating, is becoming a truly global concern, and is already imposing enormous costs on the American economy and American communities. We've seen record wildfires and hurricanes and tornadoes The weather here in the United States, as well as around the world, is beginning to impose very real costs on farmers and ranchers, on our coastal communities, and on small towns and rural communities all over our country. So I think we see companies large and small willing to step forward and speak up in favor of a carbon price because they would rather have a market mechanism than a central government control and mandate mechanism for finding a path forward.
Okay, Senator Coons.